Why she waited 47 years at the same train station. A WWII love letter that finally arrived. The autumn rain drummed against the glass windows of Prague's central station as Katarina Novak adjusted her wool coat and checked the platform clock for the 100th time. October 15th, 1942. 3:17 in the afternoon. He was late. She had been coming to this same platform every Thursday for 8 months now, clutching the same worn leather satchel, wearing the same blue dress beneath her coat, the one he had said brought out her eyes. The dress had grown loose around her waist as wartime rationing took its toll, but she cinched it tight with her father's old belt and told herself it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except being here, exactly where Thomas had promised to meet her. Subscribing is free, but it makes a huge difference for me. It's how I can keep doing what I love. The station bustled with the controlled chaos of occupied Prague. German officers moved through the crowds with mechanical precision, their boots clicking against the marble floors in a rhythm that had become the city's new heartbeat. Katarina kept her head down, her fingers tracing the edges of the letter in her coat pocket. The last letter she had received from Thomas, postmarked from somewhere in Italy 3 months ago. She had memorized every word. My dearest Katarina, by the time you read this, I will be somewhere I cannot name, doing things I cannot describe. But know that every sunrise reminds me of the morning light in your hair, and every star in this foreign sky looks pale compared to the brightness in your eyes. I dream of Thursday afternoons at our platform, of your laugh echoing through those vaulted ceilings, of the way you always bite your lower lip when you're thinking. I made you a promise, and I intend to keep it. Wait for me, my love. Wait for me at Platform 7 every Thursday at 3:15. When this madness ends, and it will end, I will find you there. I will find you, and we will board that train to anywhere but here. Until then, I carry your heart with me, as you carry mine. Forever yours, Thomas. The crowd shifted around her, a river of grey coats and worried faces. Katarina pressed herself against the pillar where they used to meet, where Thomas would emerge from the crowds like a miracle, his camera bag slung over his shoulder, and that crooked smile that made her forget there was a war at all. Thomas Holub had been Prague's most promising photojournalist before the occupation. His pictures had appeared in newspapers across Europe, capturing moments of beauty and humanity, even as darkness crept across the continent. He had an eye for finding light in the shadows, hope in the rubble, love in the midst of fear. It was that gift that had drawn the underground resistance to him, and eventually it was that same gift that had forced him to flee. They had met in the spring of 1941, when Prague still held onto the illusion that life could continue normally under German rule. Katarina was working as a translator for the Ministry of Education, her facility with German, Czech and French, making her invaluable in the new bureaucracy. She had been returning from work, her arms full of documents, when she literally collided with Thomas on the station platform. Papers scattered like snow across the marble floor. Thomas immediately dropped to his knees, gathering the documents while apologizing profusely in 3 languages. When he looked up at her, camera still hanging around his neck, she saw something in his eyes that made her forget about the scattered papers, forget about being late for dinner, forget about everything except the way he was looking at her. "I'm sorry," he had said in Czech, then repeated in German, then French, as if he couldn't decide which language might earn him the most forgiveness. "Czech will do," she had replied, smiling despite herself. "Unless you plan to knock me down in German next time." "Next time?" His eyebrows had risen hopefully. "You're assuming there will be a next time? Well, someone needs to teach you how to navigate a train station without causing disasters." That had been the beginning. Thursday afternoons became their tradition, meeting at Platform 7 when her work week ended, walking through the city as Thomas showed her Prague through his camera lens. He taught her to see the beauty that persisted despite the occupation, the way afternoon light caught the spires of St. Vitus Cathedral, how lovers still found ways to steal kisses in doorways, how children still played games in the narrow streets of Malastrana. Their love had bloomed quietly, carefully in the spaces between surveillance and curfew. They shared books borrowed from libraries before they were purged of undesirable authors. They attended concerts where musicians played Dvořák with tears in their eyes, knowing it might be the last time they could celebrate their culture so openly. They made love in her small apartment above the bookshop, speaking in whispers not because they were shy, but because walls had ears and love itself had become an act of rebellion. Thomas had been documenting the resistance's activities for months before Katarina knew. She discovered his secret by accident, finding photographs hidden in his camera bag. Images of meetings in basements, weapons caches in abandoned buildings, faces of men and women who had decided that freedom was worth dying for. When she confronted him, he had looked at her with such fear in his eyes that she realized he was more terrified of losing her than of the Gestapo. "They need someone to tell the world what's happening here," he had said, his hands shaking as he spoke. "Someone to show that we haven't given up, that we're still fighting. These pictures, and they're proof that Prague still has a soul." She had held him then, understanding that she was in love with a man whose convictions would eventually take him away from her. She had known, even as she kissed him, even as she promised to support him, that Thursday afternoons at Platform 7 were numbered. The end came sooner than either of them expected. In July 1942, someone betrayed the resistance cell Thomas had been photographing. The Gestapo raids began at dawn, and Thomas had barely escaped with his life. He came to her apartment that night, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, his camera bag empty except for one roll of film he had managed to save. "I have to leave," he had said, and those 4 words shattered her world. "Tonight, there's a network that can get me out through the mountains, but I have to go now." They had 1 hour. 1 hour to say goodbye to 2 years of love, to a future they had planned in whispered conversations, to the life they were supposed to build together when the war ended. They spent it lying in each other's arms, memorizing the feel of skin against skin, the sound of each other's breathing, the way their heartbeats synchronized when they were close. "Promise me," he had said, as dawn approached. "Promise me you'll wait at the platform, every Thursday. 3:15. When this is over, when it's safe, I'll come back, I'll find you there." "I promise," she had whispered against his neck, tasting salt from her tears on his skin. He left her his watch, a simple silver timepiece his grandfather had given him, and the promise that he would return for both it and her. She had watched from her window as he disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying nothing but a small knapsack and the hope that love could survive anything. Now 8 months later, she stood on Platform 7 checking that same watch. 3:20, 3:25. The Thursday train to Vienna pulled in right on schedule, disgorging passengers who hurried past her without a glance. Business travelers, German officials, families with hollow eyes and precious few possessions. No Thomas. Katarina waited until 4 o'clock, as she always did. She watched the platform empty, watched the pigeons peck at crumbs left by hurried passengers, watched the shadows lengthen across the marble floor. Then she walked home through streets that felt more foreign with each passing day, through a city that was forgetting how to speak its own language. The war stretched on. Seasons changed. 1943 became 1944, and still Katarina appeared at Platform 7 every Thursday at 3:15. Her co-workers began to whisper. Her few remaining friends suggested gently that perhaps it was time to accept that Thomas wasn't coming back. Her mother, in the letters she managed to smuggle in from the countryside, begged her to consider other suitors, to think about survival instead of romance. But Katarina had made a promise, and in a world where everything else was uncertain, her promise was the one constant she could control. She waited. The Soviet army liberated Prague in May 1945. Katarina was at the platform when the news came, watching German soldiers flee through the station like water through a broken dam. The city exploded in celebration. Flags appeared from hiding places. People danced in the streets. Church bells rang for the first time in years. But Thomas didn't come home. She waited through the communist takeover in 1948, watching her country trade one form of oppression for another. She waited as Prague rebuilt itself, as the scars of war slowly healed, as a new generation grew up who knew the occupation only through stories. She waited as her dark hair turned grey, as her young woman's figure gave way to middle age, as the blue dress finally fell apart and had to be replaced with others that Thomas had never seen. People called her the Lady of Platform 7. Railroad workers knew her by sight, greeting her politely but keeping their distance from her obvious madness. She became part of the station's furniture, as permanent and unremarkable as the benches or the clock. Children dared each other to approach her, making up elaborate stories about why she waited. Some said she was a witch. Others claimed she was a ghost. A few, the romantics, whispered that she was waiting for a great love to return. The years rolled by like the trains that came and went without bringing Thomas home. 1950, 1960, 1970. The station was renovated, modernized, updated for a new era. But Platform 7 remained essentially unchanged. The same marble floors, the same vaulted ceiling, the same view of the tracks stretching toward horizons that might contain anything. Katarina aged into an old woman, but she never missed a Thursday. When arthritis made standing difficult, she brought a folding chair. When her eyesight dimmed, she listened for footsteps instead of watching faces. When the young station manager suggested, with poorly concealed exasperation, that perhaps she might consider waiting somewhere else, she showed him Thomas's watch and explained, with the patience of someone who had told the story 1,000 times, that she had made a promise. The Berlin Wall fell, and suddenly Prague was flooded with tourists eager to see this preserved jewel of Central Europe. Western journalists came to document the Velvet Revolution, photographing the very streets where Thomas had once captured hope in black and white. But none of them were Thomas, and none of them brought news of him. 1989 became 1990, and the Czech Republic emerged blinking into freedom like a prisoner released from a long sentence. The world had changed completely. Computers, cell phones, satellite television, bringing distant wars into living rooms. But Katarina still came to Platform 7 every Thursday, carrying a leather satchel that held Thomas's letters, his photograph, and the stubborn flame of a promise made in 1942. On October 15th, 1989, 47 years to the day since Thomas had first been late, Katarina sat in her usual spot, watching the 3:15 train from Vienna discharge its passengers. She was 71 years old now, her back curved from decades of waiting, her hands spotted with age. The blue dress had been replaced long ago with sensible grey wool. The leather satchel was held together with tape. Thomas's watch had stopped working in 1967, but she still carried it, its hands frozen at 3:17. The crowd thinned. Business travelers hurried past, talking on mobile phones that would have seemed like magic to the young woman who had first waited here. Students with backpacks larger than her entire wardrobe during the war years. Elderly tourists clutching guidebooks in a dozen languages. And then, emerging from the crowd like a miracle she had stopped believing in, came a man with silver hair and a familiar camera bag. He was older, of course, much older. His face was lined with decades she hadn't shared. His shoulders curved under the weight of years spent far from home. But she knew the way he moved, the careful deliberation of someone who saw the world through a lens. She knew the shape of his hands, the set of his jaw, the way his eyes scanned the crowd with professional assessment before coming to rest on her face. Thomas Holub stopped walking. The camera bag slipped from his shoulder. 47 years collapsed into nothing. Katarina? His voice was rougher now, seasoned by languages she couldn't identify and experiences she couldn't imagine. But it was his voice, speaking her name like a prayer he'd been practicing. She stood slowly, her arthritic knees protesting, her heart hammering against her ribs with the same rhythm it had found in 1942. "You're late," she said, and wondered if he could hear the smile in her voice, if he remembered her teasing from another lifetime. He laughed, and the sound broke something open inside her chest. "I'm sorry. There was a war. I noticed." They stood 3 feet apart, separated by nearly half a century of silence. Other passengers flowed around them like water around stones, oblivious to the miracle occurring on Platform 7. "You waited," Thomas said, and she heard the wonder in his voice, the disbelief. "I made a promise." He reached into his jacket then, his movements careful and deliberate, and withdrew an envelope yellowed with age. Her name was written on the front in handwriting she recognized despite the decades. "I wrote you letters," he said. "Hundreds of them, but I couldn't send them. Couldn't risk leading them to you. This one I wrote the day the war ended. I've been carrying it for 44 years, waiting for the chance to deliver it in person." She took the letter with shaking hands. The paper was soft from handling, the ink faded but still legible. She opened it carefully, aware that this was the last first letter she would ever receive from him. My dearest Katarina, today the guns finally fell silent, and I can write your name without fear that someone will use it against you. The war is over, but I am not free to come home. Not yet. There are things I must do, places I must go, stories I must tell. The photographs I took of the camps, of the resistance, of the things the world needs to see, they have made me valuable to people I cannot name, and dangerous to others I cannot escape. I don't know when I will be able to return to Prague, or if you will still be waiting when I do. I would not blame you for moving on, for building a life without me. I would not blame you for anything except not knowing how much I have loved you every single day of this exile. But if you are there, if by some miracle you are still there, know that every Thursday at 3:15, wherever I was in the world, I stopped what I was doing and thought of you. I thought of Platform 7 and your blue dress, and the way you bite your lower lip when you're concentrating. I thought of the life we planned in whispered conversations, and I promised myself that someday, somehow, I would come home to you. I love you, Katarina Novak. I have loved you through a war and across continents and through decades of silence. If you are reading this, it means I finally kept the most important promise I ever made. Forever yours, Thomas. She looked up from the letter to find him watching her face with the same intensity she remembered from their early days, when he was always trying to capture the perfect moment. Where were you? She asked. Everywhere, he said simply. America first, then Southeast Asia during their war, Africa, South America, anywhere people were fighting for something that mattered. I kept taking pictures, kept telling stories. It was all I knew how to do. And now? He smiled, and she saw the young man she had fallen in love with hiding behind the weathered features of the stranger he had become. Now I'm an old photographer with too many memories, and not enough time left to make new ones. Unless... He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the silver threads in his hair, the new lines around his eyes, the way age had changed him into someone she would have to learn to love all over again. Unless a beautiful woman I once knew might be willing to board a train with me, to anywhere but here. Katarina looked around the platform that had been her entire world for 47 years, at the marble floors worn smooth by millions of footsteps, at the vaulted ceiling that had echoed with her solitary hope through decades of waiting, at the tracks that stretched toward horizons she had only imagined. Then she looked back at Thomas, at the camera bag slung over his shoulder, at the hands that had documented half a century of history while she had stood still in time, waiting for this moment. The 3:20 train to Vienna, she said. It should be arriving any minute. He held out his arm and she took it, feeling the solid reality of him through his coat sleeve. Together they walked toward the platform edge, where the Vienna train was indeed approaching, its headlight cutting through the October afternoon like a promise finally being kept. As they waited for the train to stop, Thomas pulled out a small camera, not the bulky professional equipment he had once carried, but something compact and modern. "May I?" he asked, and she nodded, understanding. He took her picture there on Platform 7, the last photograph of the lady who had waited 47 years for love to come home. Then he put the camera away and took her hand, and when the train doors opened, they stepped aboard together, leaving behind the platform where time had stood still and heading toward whatever time they had left. The train pulled away from Prague Central Station right on schedule, carrying 2 elderly passengers toward a future neither of them could have imagined when they were young and in love, and the world was at war. In Thomas's jacket pocket, his grandfather's watch began ticking again for the first time in 22 years, as if it too understood that the waiting was finally over. Behind them, Platform 7 settled back into its ordinary rhythm of arrivals and departures. Other people waited for other trains, carrying their own hopes and dreams and desperate promises. The marble floors gleamed under the afternoon light. The vaulted ceiling echoed with 1,000 conversations in 12 languages. And somewhere in the space between memory and miracle, love had proven that some promises are worth keeping, no matter how long they take to fulfill. The station clock showed 3:47 when their train disappeared around the bend, carrying them toward Vienna and beyond, toward anywhere but here, toward whatever came next for two souls who had waited 47 years to remember that love, like hope, is patient enough to outlast even the longest wars.